Zelda Sayre and F. Scott Fitzgerald burned through the jazz age, defining its brilliance, its beauty, and its ruin. Their quarrels, their affairs, their glittering nights made them legends. But as his fame rose, Scott began to steal her words, and Zelda began to drift in and out of asylums, where he alone held the key. She begged him to let her write. He forbade it. He claimed the stories of their lives belonged to him, that her art, her pain, even her memories were his to use. She had been the heroine of his novels. Now, as her voice flickered between lucidity and delirium, he ordered her manuscripts destroyed, refused to have them edited, and rewrote her suffering into his fiction. Faces blurred, reality splintered. Her husband became her jailer. Still, she painted. Still, she wrote. Still, she fought to exist in fragments. But piece by piece, her identity burned away until the fire in the asylum took the rest. This is the story of what came after the jazz age, after the parties, after the music, when the world crashed and the gods of an era fell. And among the ashes of genius and madness, only one question remained. Whose story was it to tell? Join us this week for the final part of our story, the tragic life of Zelda Sayre Fitzgerald. The glittering years were over. The parties, the headlines, the whirl of champagne and flashbulbs, all gone. What remained was silence. Zelda's body had surrendered before her spirit would admit defeat. Her mind, still fevered and luminous, began to blur the border between art and delusion. What had once been imagination now turned against her, fragmenting into voices, visions, ghosts. By the spring of 1930, there was no pretending anymore. Not for Scott, not for Zelda. When the diagnosis came, it was less revelation than requiem. Dr. Oscar Forel called it schizophrenia. Zelda slipped into a world where logic dissolved and mirrors spoke in riddles. The Clinc, perched above Lake Geneva, was purgatory disguised as paradise. The hedges were cut with surgical precision, the air perfumed with winter gardens and tennis lawns. Patients were called guests. Zelda arrived trembling. By morning, she said she wanted to get well. She asked to paint outdoors, but flinched from the others, from their laughter that seemed to echo in strange geometries. Scott wrote his letter, meant to explain her, and exposed himself instead. His vanity, his remorse, his bewildered love bled through every line. He listed her obsessions, her fatalism, her growing indifference to their daughter. He confessed the lessening of our sexual relationship, insisting it was not coldness on his part, but her absorption in ballet. Still, he enclosed one of her stories, hoping she might revise it, so I can send it to America. Then the naked plea. I would give everything for even a counterfeit of the love we once had. By late June, Zelda was no better. Her letters came in waves, lucid, despairing, laced with the fever of confinement, desperate to dance again, to do the one thing that she felt gave her life meaning, now slowly ebbing away. Where am I going to find again these months that dribble into the beats of the Clinc garden? I will soon be like a huntress of corralled game, she wrote, instead of a human being recompensed by one manifestation of beauty. She begged to leave, for Scott to come. You are wasting time and effort and money to take away the little we both have left. Days later, she tried to escape. Several nurses restrained her. She was moved to a locked ward. The dream of recovery dissolved into containment. Scott, frantic and faithless, wrote to her old teacher Egorova, begging her to dissuade Zelda from ballet. But Egorova's reply struck the final blow. Zelda had talent, enough to perform, perhaps even to succeed, but she would never be great. She will not equal the stars. Cut off from the world, Zelda began to write again. Her letters collapsed into fragments, part memory, part delusion, part prayer. In Paris, colors slipped from the air, not from the lines that held them. There was music behind my forehead, music that dropped into my stomach, spinning through me, turning, until the world broke and I was on the other side of a black gauze. Now I am afraid you'll come and find nothing left. She begged him to visit. I am thoroughly and completely humiliated and broken, if that was what you wanted. By midsummer, her body revolted. A violent eczema spread across her face, neck, and shoulders, the skin inflamed, raw, unrelenting. For months, she lay swathed in gauze, her beauty burned away. Scott, as with everything Zelda, would later fictionalize the image in Tender is the Night. She was a living, agonizing sore, coherent, even brilliant, within the limits of her special hallucinations. But the truth was crueler. Zelda wrote through the pain, her handwriting unsteady, the sentences veering between poetry and despair. Without hope or youth or money, I sit constantly wishing I were dead. Then mockingly to Scott, you can put that in your story like you do everything else. Tell everyone all I do is bitch. At the end, one last plea. Dr. Forel told me to ask you if you had stopped drinking, so I ask. Scott answered not to her, but to Forel, in a long, rambling defense of himself. He spoke of discipline, of nights spent over coffee, of the strain of ambition. Drink, he said, was never the problem. Not really. Zelda, he claimed, had encouraged it. He was the provider, the man who had given up everything for her. Now he must come first. I cannot consider 1 pint of wine at day's end as anything but one of the rights of man. To stop would be to confess, to admit that he had helped destroy her. He said he invented the ballet idea only to keep her from idleness, from despair. Every line was self-exoneration disguised as care. Zelda still tried to believe in their future. What a disgraceful mess this is, but if it stops our drinking, it is worth it. You can finish your novel. We can live somewhere with rooms to paint and write, Sundays and Mondays again, and Christmas. If she could stay sane, if he would stop drinking, if they both held on. But by late summer, she was drifting again, between recovery and relapse. When her mind darkened, Forel gave her a task. Write the truth about yourself. For once, she did. She wrote quickly, in fractured French, 7 pages that tore away pretense. The pages revealed the story she had never been allowed to tell. Her marriage, she said, had taken her into a world she was unprepared for. And then, almost clinically, she described a long affair with a French aviator. She had been locked in her villa to keep her from seeing him, first for a month, then for 5 years. She claimed that Scott's own affairs, even the one in California, barely moved her. She had already sinned in kind. What she wanted now was distance, a world where she could walk without help, where expression did not require permission. That world, for a while, had been dance. She described working obsessively, 4 hours a day, evenings, weekends, even on holiday steamers. But then something snapped. One spring day, she began to see only red, or no colors at all. Windows became unbearable. Streets became threats. Humanity, she said, looked like a bottle of ants. By Easter, she was hallucinating. Her body failed her. Her mind failed next. That summer, Scott sent her stories to Maxwell Perkins. The editor praised their power but found them too strange. One would think that if she did enough more, they might make a book. Scott dreamed of Zelda Fitzgerald, collected stories, but she could no longer focus. Her body burned, her mind flickered. From the clinic, she pleaded again, "Please help me. Every day more of me dies with this bitter and incessant beating I'm taking. You can choose the conditions of our life if I don't have to stay here. Please, please let me." Her letters grew fevered, faces warped, arms too long, voices hollow. "You've got to come to me and tell me how I was. Now I see odd things, faces stuffed and far away, out of proportion. Please explain. I want to be well and free to sit in the sun." The woman who once personified the modern age now begged only to be human again. By September, the eczema returned. She believed her body was speaking for her, that whenever she grew too calm, too normal, the illness rose to warn her. Her moods turned volatile, tender, then cruel. Her letters swayed between devotion and delirium. Scott later reshaped them into Tender is the Night. She wrote of dullness, of distance, of drifting between hours and dreams. Alone in Paris, Scott tried to piece together how it had all gone wrong. In his hotel room, he began a manuscript labeled "Written with Zelda Gone to the Clinic." It read like an autopsy. I had developed such an inferiority complex that I couldn't face anyone unless I was tight. You were going crazy in calling it genius. I was going to ruin and calling it anything that came to hand. I wish The Beautiful and Damned had been a more mature book because it captured it all. We ruined ourselves. He confessed the betrayals, the women who distracted him, the fiction of being a man of the world. It was the truest thing he ever wrote to her, and he never finished it. Zelda's answer was merciless. She accused him of romanticizing neglect, of polishing cruelty into poetry. His version, she said, was poetic but untrue. She reminded him of nights he sang while she starved, of the friends he mocked away. It was not anger now, but exhaustion. The voice of a woman finished explaining her pain. Yet even that fury faltered. Days later, she softened. Try to understand that people are not always reasonable when the world is as unstable as a sick head can render it. She described the hallucinations, the roads that vanished beneath her, the pulse that drowned her thoughts. I was semi-imbecilic when I arrived here, she wrote. It was not an excuse, but a witness from inside the storm. That winter, the illness reached its cruelest phase. She asked to see Scotty for Christmas. When the child arrived, Zelda shattered the ornaments on the tree and spoke in fragments, her words breaking apart like glass. Scotty stood frozen as her mother unraveled before her. When Scott left for America for his father's funeral, Zelda began to mend. The haunted smile, that faint, involuntary tremor, disappeared. She ate with the other patients again, spoke without drifting, even laughed. Each morning she went skiing through the pale light of St. Serges, her breath sharp against the air. The movement steadied her. The cold seemed to rinse her mind clean. By spring, her letters changed. She asked him to send books. No French, no Lawrence, no Virginia Woolf. I have enough difficulty with English for the moment, she wrote. She wanted Spengler, a book on playwriting, something that asked her to build, not unravel. She was reaching not for literature, but for a way back to herself. Through spring and into early summer, they met often. For the first time in a year, there were no scenes, no tears, no eczema, no collapse. When Scott returned, they shopped in Lausanne, lingered over apricot tarts and hot chocolate in Geneva, wandered through the afternoons like people relearning kindness. When apart, she wrote to him daily, her words warm, tentative, full of hope. There's always my infinite love. You are the sweetest and dearest of all, and I love you as I love my vanished youth, which is as much as a human heart can hold. In July, she spent 2 golden weeks at Annecy with Scott and Scotty. They danced beneath the stars, played tennis by the lake. It was like the good gone times, she wrote, when we still believed in summer hotels and the philosophies of popular songs. She told him they would never return. Nothing could equal the perfection of that moment. Back at the clinic, she sent him a mock advertisement. Fair complexion, green eyes, very fond of family life, wonderful pet to have in the home. Marked behind the left ear with a slight tendency to schizophrenia. It was her humor again, wry, self-aware, alive. On September 15, 1931, after 15 months, Zelda was discharged. Diagnosis, emotional imbalance, born of inferiority toward her husband and self-deceptions about her talent. Prognosis, favorable, so long as conflict could be avoided. They drove to Paris, then boarded the Aquitania for America. There is a photograph from that crossing. Scotty playing shuffleboard, Zelda seated alone on a deck chair, sketchpad on her knees. Her beret tilts slightly. Her shoes are plain. A cigarette burns halfway down between her fingers. The sun is bright, but she squints against it. She does not smile. The face is Zelda's, but only just. A woman returned from the fire, carrying its ash inside her. They stayed in New York only a few days before heading south to the place where everything had once begun, and maybe, just maybe, might begin again. Montgomery lay untouched by the Depression, as if the stillness of the South had refused to admit the century was changing. The streets remained sleepy and remote, Zelda wrote. Nothing, she said, had happened there since the Civil War. Scott thought it might help. He would return to the novel he hadn't touched in over a year. Zelda would keep house. There was even talk of buying. A quiet life, a second chance, the fantasy of repair. They found a house at 819 Felder Avenue, on the edge of Cloverdale. Too large, too hopeful, as always. They filled it with familiar comforts. A white Persian cat named Chopin, a bloodhound called Trouble. They bought a second-hand Stutz, hired a cook. There were football games, golf, visits with old friends, and still, by October, Scott was writing in his ledger, life dull. Zelda, too, had begun to fade. She moved strangely, smiled too hard. Friends whispered. Those who hadn't known about the Clinc found her peculiar. She told stories, quoted Faulkner. One guest heard her speak casually of an unaliving pact she and Scott had once made, a promise to end it all at 35. Scott turned 35 that September. The charm had worn off. He wrote, "Recession and procession. Zelda well, worse, better." Montgomery suffocated her. "You know the kind," she wrote to a friend. "Women of 50 still known as baby." In that house, Zelda wasn't the wild girl of the jazz age. She was the daughter of the judge, the mother of Scotty, the woman who'd been returned from Europe with instructions on how to be whole. It was domesticity by prescription. The air thickened. Judge Sayre, once towering, was dying from the long tail of influenza. Mrs. Sayre moved through the rooms in memory, outwardly composed, inwardly drifting. The house was full of ghosts. Then Scott announced he was leaving. Again, MGM had offered him a script. Irving Thalberg. Real money. He would be gone no more than 8 weeks, he promised. Back by Christmas. Zelda said nothing. She smiled, she nodded. And then, the moment he left, she began to write. Letters, stories, and a self in disguise. She wrote with a discipline that surprised even her. 7 stories in 8 weeks. Some were gothic, others glittering, still others blurred with Riviera light and loneliness. But one stood apart. A couple of nuts. Larry and Lola, banjo-playing, nightclub-singing Americans adored on the Paris stage. Youthful, decorative, naive, promoted, paraded, broken. Lola sleeps with their patron. There's an abortion, lawsuits, a return to America. Larry dies, Lola survives, alone. They had possessed something precious, the narrator reflects, a jaunty confidence in life and in each other. Something most of us never have. It wasn't subtle. She was turning their life into fiction, not to punish but to understand. The damage, the complicity, the charm of destruction. But she missed him. She wrote him 32 letters, read his stories at night like scripture. "I'll never be able to write like that," she confessed. "Mine are too thin, too spiritless." She didn't send him the stories. Not a single one. Not because she didn't care what he thought, but because she cared too much. The isolation didn't alarm Scott. Not yet. He didn't see what it echoed. He didn't remember Paris, the ballet, the fevered writing, the stillness before the storm. In early November, her father's condition worsened. On the 17th, Judge Sayre died. Alabama mourned. The state draped its Supreme Court chamber in black. Flags hung half-mast. Roses were cut from the Capitol grounds and laid by his casket. Zelda wrote, "It's just the little personal things we care about in people. Who cares what good or evil dies? And all of us care that we will never hear a certain chuckle again." She tried to hold herself together. "My eyes are bothering me," she told Scott. "I've been sleepless with asthma. I've noticed touches of eczema." She wanted to be well when he returned. "So you'll find me fresh and cheerful." But the house filled with relatives, the grief pressed down, the walls closed in. "Life is horrible without you," she wrote. "There's not another living soul with whom I have the slightest communion." She left his hat in the hallway, his cane on the bed. She kept the light on in his study, so it looked like he was there when she woke. "I have no independent self," she wrote, "save the one that lives in you." By December, Miss Ella appeared in Scribner's magazine, a story written carefully, ambitiously, with a voice that was deeply Southern and quietly devastating. Ella was not Zelda. She was older, still sealed behind a garden wall. Life unfolded under lace and ritual, untouched by change, until a Christmas party, a moment, a man not her fiancé, a fire, a romance. A person ends their own life. Afterward, Ella withdraws into silence, swinging gently in a white hammock, avoiding heat, avoiding love. It was Zelda's finest work. Not a glittering sketch or a clever pastiche, but a story, controlled, symbolic, and unmistakably personal. Still, she didn't trust it. "I don't dare reread it," she told Scott. "Knowing it's not first rate, I don't want to be discouraged. I wish you could teach me to write." Even in triumph, she deferred. Not out of humility, out of habit. She was still the pupil, the wife, the girl who believed her brilliance needed permission. But Scott was coming home. She began to dream aloud again, dreams shaped like recovery. They would build a house, she said, yellow, bright as rebirth, with frank windows that frame. They'd have more children, as many as possible. One of them would be named, with a familiar wink, Dementia Precox Fitzgerald. She wanted permanence, repetition, a song that stayed in tune. This place, she wrote, is like one of those cracked phonograph records that plays always in the same place, and you never can come to the tune. And then at last he returned. They fled south, just the two of them, to the Don Cesar Hotel in St. Petersburg. Zelda swam. She tanned copper. She read, rested, smiled. She was soft, gentle, adoring. Scott told Perkins, "At last, for the first time in 2.5 years, I am going to spend 5 consecutive months on my novel." She was working too. They sat side by side in the golden quiet, writing. Then one morning it came back, a red patch on her neck, faint, fleeting. The eczema. Scott told himself it was nothing, seasickness maybe, or stress. It faded, then returned. On the road back to Montgomery, the sun heavy on their windshield, Zelda fell silent. Her eyes darted, her skin flushed. She didn't sleep that night. At dawn, she found a flask in Scott's suitcase and drank the whole thing. At 5 a.m., she shook him awake, her voice rising, panic. She believed someone was doing things to her, hurting her, and that Scott knew. She accused, then begged, then fell quiet. And then she asked, "Take me to a clinic." It wasn't surrender. It was strategy. The eczema, the eye pain, she didn't believe it came from inside. Not entirely. She believed someone, perhaps Scott himself, was behind it. In a dream she'd written weeks before, Scott had returned to her with white hair, aged overnight from guilt. His trunk was full of grotesque canvases, trees made of cloth, hanging like the arms of dolls. She woke from it disturbed, but not surprised. He didn't argue. On February 10th, he wired Dr. Adolph Meyer at Johns Hopkins. They were coming to Baltimore, and Zelda was going back in the clinic. On February 12th, 1932, Zelda entered the Phipps Psychiatric Clinic at Johns Hopkins. She said she couldn't sleep, that her father's death, while Scott was away, had undone her. That being left alone with her daughter had frayed something she could no longer stitch together. Scott filled in the rest. He always did. To the attending resident, he delivered a diagnosis, not medical, but marital. Zelda, he said, had always been wild. The town scandal. His mistress before his wife, spoiled by her mother, hungry for praise, incapable of criticism, vain, jealous, proud. He said nothing of the drinking. He mentioned the affair with Lois Moran, only to explain Zelda's reaction to it. Dismissed her distress as the first flare of madness. The only thing he admitted, and only to discredit her, was that she'd once accused him of a homosexual attachment to Ernest Hemingway. Then he left. Back to Montgomery. At Phipps, Zelda's speech splintered. Her thoughts darted sideways. She'd start a sentence and end somewhere else entirely, not senseless but unsequenced. The doctors called it thought disorder. But this was how Zelda always spoke when she was closest to the truth. She admitted to hallucinations at Prangan's. Just schizophrenia, she said with a crooked smile. She and Scott, she told them, had been consumed by their love and their hatred. With Dr. Meyer, she was evasive. With the residents, flippant. When asked about her friends, she replied, "There's no one I distrust like my friends. I have cat thoughts that chase the mouse thoughts, and sometimes they get all the mouse thoughts caught. And I read Aeschylus to put myself to sleep." She told a nurse she'd likely spend the rest of her life in sanitariums. Not in fear, in certainty. And in that bright, humming room at Phipps, with cat thoughts chasing mouse thoughts, and one good eye watching from the shadows, Zelda began to write the book that would become her reckoning. Not a diary, not a confession, a novel. Her novel. And when Scott returned, it would tear their marriage at the root. By March, the doctors were cautiously optimistic. Dr. Squires told Scott that Zelda's tension had eased, that she'd finished 2 chapters, the second stronger than the first. She might actually have something. Zelda fretted over her overuse of said, lamented copying Hemingway, much to her sorrow, and joked that she too would die with her boots on. Scott was intrigued. He wrote back that her lack of plot structure didn't concern him. She wasn't a natural storyteller, he said, not in the sense that I am. The next day, March 9th, Dr. Squires delivered the blow. Zelda had finished the novel. She'd sent it to Scribner's. They were interested. When Scott received it 5 days later, he erupted. For 4 years, he wrote to Dr. Squires, I've worked intermittently on my novel, unable to proceed because of the necessity of keeping Zelda in sanitariums. Now, he said she had stolen it. One section, he claimed, imitated his rhythm, his structure, even his material. She'd taken episodes he'd labored over for years and flattened them into anecdotes. She had even named a character Amory Blaine, the hero of This Side of Paradise. My criticisms of her own material, her youth, her dancing, her father's death will be impersonal, he insisted. But this is something else. She was writing her own life, but he claimed the words were his. 2 days later, still seething, he wired Scribner's. Zelda's novel, he said, would seriously compromise what literary future she may have and cause inconceivable harm in its present form. For the first time, she had crossed into his territory. Not his stories, his novel, his name, his voice. The book was raw, imperfect, deeply hers. She wrote what she knew, and what she knew was them. To Scott, it was theft. To Zelda, it was truth. The doctors at Phipps were blindsided. They hadn't known Zelda would send it off. They apologized, promised it wouldn't happen again. But the damage was done. Zelda had written her book, and Scott had read it. Back in Montgomery, Scott turned to his own manuscript, a novel grown darker, hungrier, meaner. He called the 7th draft The Drunkard's Holiday. It followed a young psychiatrist, Dick Diver, and his brilliant, unstable wife, Nicole. The glamour of the Murphys, the wreckage of the Fitzgeralds, Zelda's illness, his disillusionment, their marriage, hollowed out and fictionalized. He made notes in the margin. A man who is a natural idealist loses his idealism and turns to drink and dissipation. The man was Scott. And Nicole? Nicole was Zelda. He wrote her case history like a physician, born in 1901, forced into sex at 15, committed at 16, married at 18, children, affairs, collapse, madness. At her worst, she became homicidal. Portrait of Zelda, that is, a part of Zelda, he scribbled in the margins. He mapped her breakdowns against Nicole's, built a method for mining sickness into scenes. Some details were invented, but the emotional anatomy was hers. That she might object didn't seem to trouble him. She had always been material, and he hadn't published a novel since Gatsby. Now at last, he had something, and so did she. Scott never replied to her directly. Zelda learned of his fury through Dr. Squires and wrote back quickly, trying to calm the storm. I didn't send it to you first, she said, knowing you were working and honestly feeling I had no right to interrupt you. She admitted Save Me the Waltz was flawed. She didn't want one of his scathing criticisms to destroy what little confidence she had left. I could scream with that sense of inertia that hovers over my life. She ended simply, please realize it wasn't from any sense of not turning to you, just time and other ill-regulated elements. Gufo, please love me. Life is very confusing. But I love you. But Scott would not bend. By sending it to his editor before showing him, she had broken the code. She wrote again, you, of all people, wouldn't have preferred my folding my hands during my long-occupied hours. She said she loved him. Said she would have collapsed long ago if she had me on my hands. She was calm, he wasn't. He demanded revisions. She gave in. Of course, I gladly submit to anything you want about the book. What she really wanted to write, she said, was the story of myself versus myself. Save Me the Waltz didn't just start a fight. It ripped open the old wound, the one that had never healed. Scott said she had taken his life, his voice, him, and carved it into fiction. But just before leaving Alabama for Baltimore, he wrote to Dr. Squires, the same man who once suggested they might be better apart. Each of us would be well rid of the other, he wrote, in full face of the irony that we have never been so desperately in love with each other in our lives. He wasn't being dramatic. In Save Me the Waltz, Zelda Fitzgerald did what she had never been allowed to do. She told the story herself, not Scott's story, hers. through the voice of Alabama Beggs, a Southern girl from Montgomery who marries a dazzling artist and is swept into the whirl of Europe, beauty, and disillusion. Zelda rewrote the fairy tale. Scene by scene, she climbed down from the tower. The novel unfolds in jagged vignettes, luminous and unmoored. Its grammar stumbles, sentences twist, misspellings bloom like bruises. It was raw, unvarnished, her. Scott had always polished their life into fiction. Zelda let it bleed. She didn't hide behind metaphor. She didn't smooth the edges. She wrote with nerves exposed. The original manuscript is lost, but the galley proofs, scrawled over in her hand, show a woman clawing back control. She slashed the speakeasy nights in Paris gloss, replaced it with something deeper, something earned. Scott warned Scribners not to let her chase his kind of glory. She wasn't 21 anymore, he said. She wasn't strong. The contract was signed June 14, 1932. Half her royalties went to pay Scott's debts. Alabama Beggs, thinly veiled, was Zelda. The judge, the mother, the careless husband, all drawn from life. But the facts weren't what mattered. The map was emotional. Alabama's search for self, her aching, endless longing to be seen, was Zelda's own. Zelda laces the novel with images of ramparts and strongholds. She was raised in a fortress, not of stone, but of judgment. The judge didn't demand obedience, he demanded perfection. Millie, her mother, floats through the house like a warm ghost, folding grief into myth, bending truth for comfort. Alabama learns from them both, how to smile through shame, how to bleed without stain. And still she loves. She meets David. He sees her. He carves their names in wood and promises the stars. She doesn't say, "I love you." Not yet. But when she does, it isn't love, it's disintegration. "If I don't accept your way of thinking, you'll leave me to myself," she says, and trades the judge's tower for David's. Soon she is pregnant. Bonnie arrives in a haze of hurdy-gurdy music. No tenderness, no fanfare, just a child, and the story moves on. They flee to Europe. The gardens are rotting, the cupids grotesque. Zelda's prose twists botanical beauty into horror. David is no longer her jailer. He is simply absent. Then comes a French aviator, named for Honeysuckle. He invites her to his apartment. She hesitates, says yes, then no. They never sleep together. He vanishes to Indochina, leaving behind a letter in French she cannot read. Whatever it was that she wanted from Jacques, Zelda writes, Jacques took it with him to squander on the Chinese. She tells herself she didn't need it, just as she told herself she didn't need Scott's love or her father's approval. In the end, David thrives. Alabama disappears into empty hotels. She returns to ballet. Her friends don't understand. David mocks her. "Are you under the illusion you'll ever be any good at that stuff?" The biggest difference in the world is between the amateur and the professional. "You mean yourself and me," she answers softly. Then the final blow, a foot infection. The tendons rupture. She'll walk again, but never dance. In life, Zelda broke under the weight of her mind. In fiction, Alabama is broken by her body. And yet, in the novel's final chapter, something glimmers. She returns to the South, to the father who had built the tower. He is dying, his wrist no bigger than a bird's. "I've got to go to sleep, baby," he tells her. She takes his hand. "Why do we spend years using up our bodies to nurture our minds with experience," she asks, "and find our minds turning then to our exhausted bodies for solace? Why, Daddy?" "Ask me something easy," he says. And then he dies. There is no grand message, no inheritance, no absolution. The fairy tale ends. The girl left the tower, but what she found wasn't freedom, only masks, only mirrors, fragments of herself reflected in men who never truly saw her. The final scene is still, quiet. Twilight settles across the living room, and Zelda, Alabama, remains seated, watching it come in. After Save Me the Waltz, Zelda began to fracture again, caught between therapy, love, and control. She had given them her story, yet the doctors at Phipps still couldn't reach her. She treated their sessions like drawing rooms, charming, evasive, detached. When pressed to speak plainly, she offered a compromise. She'd write it down. What emerged was neither fiction nor confession. Not quite memory, not quite madness. A fractured sketch of her life with Scott, part fantasy, part fury, told in third person until the distance cracked and the I broke through. She wrote herself not as a patient but a vacuum, a vessel defined by what surrounded her, the architecture, the staff, the ghosts. She recalled a fever dream, lace dresses, slammed doors, bare feet in Christmas light, rage in velvet salons. There was Scott, drunk, critical, friends, lovers, rehearsals, fights, thunderstorms, the nurse she hated, the child she barely saw, gardenias, and blood. At the end, she called it a fairy tale. But the fairy tale was burning, and Scott, as always, had his own version. In Baltimore, he briefed the doctors, explaining Zelda, dissecting her childhood, blaming her mother. She was suckled too long, he said, taught to charm instead of stand. Zelda seethed. Furious, he delayed her novel. Furious, she still needed his approval. My book, she said, is none of my husband's goddamned business. Their visits turned to scenes. He demanded to see her work. She refused. He insulted. She endured, then cried all night. When calm returned, they wrote letters, full of sorrow and apology, trying to hold on. Scott sent a parable. A dancer forbids her sister to perform La Chatte, the ballet she's preparing. If your performance comes first, she warns, I'm done. The sister pleads, but I want to express myself. Scott's meaning was clear. Zelda was the sister. La Chatte was tender as the night, and he alone owned their story. To him, she was still the little fish beneath the shark. She wrote in the mornings, painted afternoons, planned a second novel about a husband and wife driven to an asylum by their heartless daughter. You wouldn't learn they were already institutionalized until the last page. Scott's own book, Tender as the Night, was also about a psychiatrist's wife losing her mind. They had once shared a life. Now they shared a battlefield. Save Me the Waltz sold fewer than 1,400 copies. Zelda earned $120. Critics were split. Some called it overwrought, others a dizzy delight. Her favorite review praised her peculiar genius, said the ballet chapters burned with life, but that Alabama felt like an insane child. Even Zelda admitted regret. The manuscript had been butchered, unproofed, abandoned by its publisher. She kept writing, another novel about madness. Scott forbade it. They had agreed, he said, he would write first. There is a deathly terror, he told Dr. Rennie, that I may make something very fine from this material of ours, and that I may preclude her from making something very fine. Deflated, Zelda turned her anger inward. The fights with Scott grew cruel. Then came the worst truth. She barely knew her daughter. Of course I care, she told Dr. Rennie, but I give her nothing. My child is gone from the present, out of my life. It isn't fair, and I make terrible kicks against it. At dinner, she stared at the feet of guests, wondering who was pregnant. On the tennis court, she drifted, served out of turn, forgot which side she stood on. Scott noticed and kept taking notes. By the fall of 1932, Zelda turned to comedy to outrun collapse. Her second novel had stalled under Scott's control and her own unraveling. So she wrote a play, Scandalabra, a farce, nonsense with teeth. No one in New York would touch it. Scott was dissolving beside her, drinking too much, writing too little. He paced the halls in a bathrobe, reeking of gin and smoke, muttering scenes aloud, tender as the night, scribbled in fragments across reams of failure. He told himself it would save him, that it would save them, but the words wouldn't come. His secretary remembered the retyping, the twitch of his hands. He'd drift upstairs in a daze, asking Zelda for memories, fragments, scenes, names. He couldn't invent, he couldn't remember, but she could. And though she was forbidden to write, her words still shaped his. Her voice still served his. She couldn't publish, but she could still provide. And still, there were moments. Late nights, they'd talk, high, brittle laughter that vanished before it finished. Zelda never criticized, never resisted. A woman with no say, one staffer said. Scott watched her schedule, her tone, her eyes. By December, even her doctors noticed. It was Scott who was unraveling. He admitted it to Dr. Rennie. I could make Zelda psychotic in 15 minutes. All I'd have to do is suggest I was in love with another woman. She'd snap. Zelda stayed quiet, fresh-faced, harassed, shirt untucked, a woman chased by her own thoughts. She spent hours alone upstairs, dancing, painting, writing, wandering barefoot through the garden beds. Then came spring 1933. A wound opened that never quite closed. They were attending joint therapy at Phipps once a week. Scott was drinking heavily, taking luminol. Zelda's nearness, at dinner, in hallways by his desk, enraged him. "I've never forgotten the novel," he said. "Save Me the Waltz, its betrayal, its audacity. 4 days ago," he told his doctor, "I said I was trading my health for her sanity. I told her I was through. She could go to bed if she liked." He called it survival. It felt like drowning. "I arrive at the gate of such questions as whether Zelda isn't more worth saving than I am," he wrote. And then, the line that ended all doubt. "She lives in a greenhouse. My money, my name, my love, and still feels no responsibility to me." What he wanted now was power, the right to send her back to Phipps whenever she slipped. If the doctors refused, he warned he'd turn to legal means. Possibly she would have been a genius if we had never met. Now, he said, she was wrecking him. Dr. Meyer pushed back. The problem wasn't only Zelda's. He told Scott to stop drinking, to stop playing jailer. Scott was livid. "I thought we were collaborating," he wrote. "My 15 years of emotional knowledge, your clinical skill. The Zelda you see is an actress. The Zelda who lives here, that's the real one." But Scott would never give up alcohol, or the story, or control. On May 28, 1933, they sat down with Dr. Rennie and a stenographer. A final reckoning. The transcript runs 114 pages. Scott began, "I am being destroyed by this marriage. It's unfair, all of it. I have fought and struggled my whole life to be a novelist." Then, looking at Zelda, "She has written nice little sketches, but she has nothing essentially to say." Zelda waited, then cut him off. "You mean you were drinking constantly? That's the truth. That's why I wanted to be a dancer, because I had nothing else." Scott struck back. "You are a third-rate writer, a third-rate ballet dancer." She didn't flinch. "Then it seems to me," she said, "you're making a rather violent attack on third-rate talent. Everything they'd lived, every heartbreak, every ruin, Scott claimed as his. All of it is mine. None of it is your material. I am the professional novelist. If I catch you writing, I will destroy it." Zelda's voice fell to a whisper. "You know it would break my heart." She told him she wanted to be free, not just from his money, from his permission. But Scott didn't want a rival. He wanted, in his words, a complementary intelligence. No fiction, no psychiatry, no Riviera, no Switzerland. The boy who once believed in beauty now believed in control. Zelda had touched the final sacred thing, his work. And he could no longer tell the difference between protecting her and possessing her. He thought himself the artist, sensitive, self-sacrificing, but he could not see what Zelda needed. Stability, calm, belief. And still she asked. They were no longer dazzling, no longer invincible, no longer young. Scandalabra. In June 1933, Scandalabra opened in Baltimore. Zelda designed the sets, defended every line, refused all edits. Scott never read it, never came to rehearsals. They practiced in a converted carriage house. The director trimmed. Zelda resisted. "That's a very important part of the play," she'd say. "It's cleared up completely in the third scene of the second act." It may not have worked, but it was hers. She summoned guests from New York. Friends, agents, anyone who might whisper Broadway if they liked what they saw. Scott paced outside in a sack suit with a Turkish towel at his waist, loudly assuring strangers he'd heard it was very funny. He even bought extra tickets to look like a man with a hit on his hands. The curtain rose at 8:15. It didn't fall until after 1 a.m. When Zelda came backstage, drenched in heat and failure, even she knew something had to change. She turned to Scott. And Scott, ever the showman, took command. Each night that week, the cast met in the green room. Scott flanked by beer, reading lines, cutting scenes. If no one could defend a sentence, it vanished. By 4 a.m, they'd barely reached Act 1. The edits didn't help. Even trimmed, Scandalabra was chaos. A farm boy inherits millions, but only if he lives a life of debauchery. He marries a showgirl, she falls in love, they fail spectacularly to be wicked. Birds mimic vaudeville. Vaudeville mimics birds. No one knows what's real. Critics staggered into the Baltimore night. One called it a warped and mangled Oscar Wilde, endlessly spouting epigrams that just won't click. Even Scott couldn't save it. That same summer came the call. Zelda's brother, Anthony, had broken down, nervous prostration, they said. He'd lost his job. He was terrified of what he might do to their mother. He begged to go to Johns Hopkins, to be near Zelda. The family refused. Eventually, they stopped speaking. Then came the letter. Zelda had suffered a toxic attack. Mrs. Sayre described it with gentle caution. Scott turned white. "I thought she'd last another 2 months," he told Scotty. "But this may be the last time you'll ever see her sane." He sent her to Montgomery. "There's a point," he said, "beyond which families can do nothing." And yet, he still hoped. "If Babylon revisited cells," he told a friend, "I'll send her to the coast." He wrote to Zelda, 20 years ago, This Side of Paradise was a bestseller. 10 years ago, Paris was having its last American season. 5 years ago, I broke down in Asheville. The cards began falling badly for us, far too early." When Scotty arrived, Zelda had steadied. Scott exhaled. "All I want," he wrote, "is to picture the two of you, diving from great heights, graceful in the water." But Zelda's world had slowed to a crawl. 2 days a week folding bandages. The rest, sitting beside her mother, sipping fruit over crushed ice. For her 40th birthday, Scott sent gladiolas and dahlias. She wrote back, "Dearest Scott, one of the hardest things about Montgomery is that it reminds me of our early days together." She still asked about his work. "Why don't you write for the Saturday Evening Post again?" He replied, "Those stories were tied up with you and me, the happy ending. I must have had a powerful imagination to keep projecting it so far into the past." In November 1940, he wrote, "I'm 44, nothing changes." He was still coughing, still writing The Last Tycoon. "The Constitution is amazing," he said. "Nothing quite kills it until the heart has run its entire race." Zelda answered, "Mama's little house is full of grace. The mornings remind me of 25 years ago, when life was as full of promise as it is now of memory." In Los Angeles, he wrote in a faded blue robe, hair twisted from the places he pulled at it in thought. He liked to say the word niche and laugh until he cried, but sometimes he talked about Zelda. He told Sheila Graham about the girls in Montgomery who painted their faces before bathing to keep their makeup fresh. He said he'd once fought a duel for Zelda's honor. "She was never more beautiful," he said, "than when I had to fight for her." December 1940. On a gray Thursday, he nearly collapsed in Schwab's drugstore. The doctor called it a cardiac spasm. On December 6th, he wrote Zelda, "If I'm careful not to overtire myself, I'll recover. Everything is my novel now. It's of absorbing interest." He hoped to finish by February. A week later, another cardiogram. "The heart," he told her, "is one of the organs that does repair itself." On December 20th, he canceled a doctor's appointment. He had solved a scene. That night, they saw This Thing Called Love. He straightened his bow tie and said, "I've always wanted to be a dandy." The next morning, he dressed, dictated a letter to Scotty, sat down by the fire, read about Princeton football, and ate a chocolate bar. Then he stood, reached for the mantle, and fell. In a moment, he was dead. Harold Ober called Zelda. She could not believe it. On Christmas Day, she wrote, "In retrospect, it seems as if he was always planning happinesses for Scotty and for me. Life always seemed so promissory when he was around. I always believed he could take care of anything." Although we were not close anymore, Scott was the best friend a person could have been to me. She didn't go to the funeral. Her brother-in-law stood in her place. December 27th, a raw winter day. Judge Biggs. The Murphys, the Obers, the Turnbulls, Scotty, Protestant prayers, no Catholic rites, no burial among the Fitzgeralds, just cold ground, and the end of a legend. Zelda wrote, "I feel as if I've been robbed of a part of myself, some aspect shaped in relation to him. I can't believe I will never again see him walk through the door, with his pockets full of promise and his heart full of refurbished hopes." To Rosalind, she added, "The long months he spent beside me in Switzerland, the reams of hospital bills, the loyalty. It's more poignant now than it was appreciated at the time." She didn't say she was lonely. She didn't have to. They hadn't seen each other in a year and a half. But he had written her every week. But to her, they were the only letters that still called her back to life, because only she had known him before. Only Zelda had loved both the genius and the ruin. the golden boy in Westport, the broken man in Los Angeles. She had been there at the beginning, and she was the last person alive who remembered the whole thing. 10 months after his death, The Last Tycoon was published. They bundled it with Gatsby, with Mayday, Crazy Sunday, Absolution. The nation remembered. "This is not a legend," wrote Stephen Vincent Benet. "This is a reputation." Zelda read the book. She wrote Wilson. His work endures because of his stamina, his spiritual loyalty to the idea of life. But she had her own judgment. "Kathleen," she said, "is undesirable, the sort of woman who knows how to turn the Iceman's advances to profitable account." She didn't name Shayla Graham. She didn't have to. Zelda knew what it meant when the mythology had moved on without her. After The Last Tycoon appeared, Zelda began her final novel. She called it Caesar's Things. She never finished it. By 1942, she was back in Montgomery. She wrote in fragments that flickered between revelation and fever. "I'm trying," she said, "to induct the biblical pattern of life into its everyday manifestations." But what she wrote instead was her mind, unspooling. Half prophecy, half confession. Every sentence braided with scripture and hallucination. Her heroine, Jano, was Zelda again, a southern girl with a judge for a father, a brother she adored, a hospital across the street. The story opened in childhood. Jano disobeys her father, crosses the street, and finds her brother with something he shouldn't have. It isn't a toy, it's a corpse. She flees to an oak tree, lies down, and sees God in a blaze of light, a God of cause and effect, a God of punishment and fire. From there, the order collapses. Caesar's Things disintegrates into fragments, voices, warnings, divine trials. The hospital becomes a stage. The stage becomes a courtroom. Jano is judged. A poison cup is offered. She drinks it and watches her own collapse from a throne of light. Doctors discuss the case. We will proceed with the regular medical routine. Zelda had lived that moment too many times. Now she wrote it down like scripture. She returned to the shadowed schoolyard, to the father who offered no rules, to the boys who became a jury, to what happened and wasn't named. It is the kind of thing one forgets until years later when it looms up in a different light, a monstrous weakness prevailing. Then came Jacob, painter, husband, destroyer, Scott renamed. Jano loved him like drowning. Being desperately in love, she wrote, involves a desperate existence. They drank, they quarreled, they survived, she said, on the possibility and hope of sin. He was always more important, always busy with pencils and bits of string. She was expected to be grateful. He loved other women. She learned to call it sweetness. He gave her a golden necktie. "I'll let you wear it next time you want to hang yourself," he said. And they laughed, as if wit could bleach humiliation. They reached Paris again, Zelda and Scott reborn as Jano and Jacob. But the city had curdled. Champagne now tasted like rust. She redecorated the cage, drank at the Ritz, pretended admiration while despising everything she saw, driven by the idea that somewhere else might be nearer the center. The mask became her only language. She called it custom, civilization, marriage. She left one party with a man named Mr. Fish. Wine, dawn, the edge of something sordid. "This is wrong," she whispered. He drove her home. Then came Jacques, the aviator, the fever, the ghost, the man who once was real, now rewritten. They kissed in a sea-blown pavilion while thunder rolled. There were two of them. It might be the end of the world. The affair never quite happens. It only corrodes. Zelda doesn't consummate. She circles it in guilt, in dread, until collapse. Jacob litters the villa with bottles and cigarette stubs. A man absolved by disorder. When she confesses, he locks the door. Of course she understood, Zelda wrote. A locked door is not difficult of comprehension. She reads books. She doesn't go to the beach. The novel ends not with climax, but with exhaustion. No forgiveness, no punishment, only paralysis. For 6 years she worked on Caesar's Things, alone. The pages hover over what never happens, always about to break, never allowed to. She wrote of pressure without release. Even her grammar mirrored it, sentences collapsing, images piling like rubble. She had reached the one moment she could not face, and again she turned away. Jano's locked room was Zelda's own. Among her papers, one last fragment, the big top. Jano and Jacob again. But this time, Jacob is dead. It is not fiction anymore. He was gone. They had been much in love. Everything he did had been important. She wasn't going to have him anymore, not to promise her things, nor to comfort her, nor just be there as general compensation. She remembers the small things, his linen handkerchiefs, the flowers he never forgot, the way he made life seem useful and promising. It's no longer artifice, it's a prayer. Then came the last line Zelda would ever write about love. Perhaps the last line she ever wrote at all. Nobody has ever measured, even the poets, how much a heart can hold. When one really can't stand anymore, the limits are transgressed, and one thing has become another. Poetry registers itself on the hospital charts, and heartbreak has to be taken care of. But heartbreak perishes in public institutions. That was her epitaph. The final sentence of her life disguised as fiction. A woman who turned her breakdown into scripture, her love into literature, and her heartbreak into evidence. By 1943, Zelda lived with her mother in a small white house at 322 Sayre Street. 2 bedrooms, a porch rimmed with green paint, roses climbing the posts. Inside, a piano, a chintz sofa, a secretary from her grandfather's house, and on every wall, photographs of Scott, of Scotty, of herself. Zelda painted in the quiet of the patio, as if silence could be rebuilt. Her flowers, thin, exact, Chinese in their discipline. Her self-portrait glared from the page. The eyes wide and unblinking, the mouth pale, tight, controlled. A face trying not to move. Her letters to Scotty changed too. The cleverness had drained away. What remained was duty. I trust that life will use you far less inexorably than it has used me. Pray to God, my darling, and pray for me. In February 1943, Scotty married Lieutenant Lanahan. A quick wartime wedding. It brought back the excitement of those days 20 years ago, when there was so much of everything adrift in an eternal springtime, so many aspirations afloat on the lethal twilights that one's greatest concern was which taxi to take. At a garden party, she told an old friend, "We play parlor games from the Ladies' Home Journal." Then she added softly, "Tell my daughter about me, when I was young and life was before her." By 1944, Zelda had become religious again. Not gentle faith, but fire. She mimeographed her own tracts, sent them to friends like Gertrude Stein, Edmund Wilson, Carl Van Vechten. "You should redeem yourself, pray and repent," she wrote Wilson. No matter what the catalogs may call a rose, the odor remains funereal. She begged him to save himself before he burned. She told Scotty to grow her soul through rightness. Knowing the right, there isn't any alternative. The purpose of life on earth is that the soul shall grow. But her own life had stopped growing. It only remembered. "The japonica still blooms," she wrote. "These rainy twilights are glamorous and sorrowful, and make me wish that I weren't too old to remember tragic love affairs." Her days circled the past. The American Mercury offered her $50 to reprint one of Scott's stories. He would have been so pleased, she told Scotty. It is good that he is still remembered. And always, she came back to Scott. "Daddy was the keynote and prophet of his generation," she wrote. "He dramatized the last post-war era, gave it its significance. He loved glamour, and so did I. I wish I'd been able to do better at one thing and not run into so many cul-de-sacs." When despair threatened, she turned it into prayer. "I reconciled myself to the implacable exigences of life. I would not exchange my experience for any other, because it has brought me the knowledge of God." She bought 2 doves, sat before their cage listening, wishing, she said, that somebody would send me a valentine. She advised Scotty on decorating, earthenware, pink sheets stitched with embroidery, and on marriage, croissants for breakfast, unless he's like Daddy. By 1946, she was back at Highland again. A nurse remembered her on a rainy hike, bent in the laurel, hunting dry wood, hair soaked, skirt clinging, a disheveled woman still trying to pass a test of metal. That spring, Scotty had a son. Zelda exhaled joy. What a good idea to have a 7.5-pound boy. She was radiant, a grandmother at 45, and for a moment the world turned kindly again. That summer she went east to see the baby. In Wilmington, visiting Judge Biggs, she paused before the dining room table. There were berries in a bowl. "They have thorns," she said. "The crown of thorns. Christ wore a crown of thorns. You must get rid of them immediately." They threw the berries away. On her last evening there, when told it was time for the train, Zelda smiled. "Don't worry," she said. "The train will be late. Scott has told me. Can't you see him sitting here beside me?" When they reached the station, the train was, in fact, late. They waited in silence until it came. By 1946, Zelda no longer rose with the sun. Some mornings she stayed in bed until the smell of frying bacon drifted through the little house on Sayre Street. Ham, sausage, grits, and hot cakes. She spoke often of the old days, Montgomery balls, New York taxis, the honey-colored years with Scott. Then came the illness again, a cold that turned to fever, to sleepless nights haunted by evil spirits. Her hair was gray now, her body heavier, but she clung to small acts of creation. She painted bowls for Scotty, each one a map of their old lives, Princeton, St. Paul, Paris, Montgomery. She etched trays for the Obers, for the Biggses, little altars to the life that had burned away. She spoke always in the language of repentance, divine purpose, atonement, the forgiveness of sins. A young writer who visited her remembered one last afternoon. Early spring, flowers trembling open, the air still cold. They planned to walk to town, to look at prints in a shop window. She appeared dressed for another century, a blue coat trimmed in gray fur, a dark green cloche hat with felt ribbons tipped in dogwood blossoms. Her mood was bright, almost girlish. They had gone only a few blocks when 3 children passed. One whispered to the others, "You see there, that's the crazy woman Mama's been telling us about." The words landed like stones. Zelda heard them, of course. She stopped, her smile gone, and turned to Paul. "I don't feel too well," she said. "We can go another day." They walked back slowly to the little house on Sayre Street, the wind lifting the ribbons from her hat, the blossoms brushing her shoulders like a benediction. By 1947, Zelda rose late, if at all. Lunch was at 12 or 12:30. She could not remember. That summer, Scotty and her family came south. Zelda threw a party at the Blue Moon. Fried chicken, candied yams, sweet cakes, laughter too loud. Jack Lanahan rose and toasted his mother-in-law. She smiled, radiant, brittle, undone. By autumn, the heat and exhaustion broke her again. She grew furtive, sleepless, afraid. When her mother called for a taxi to take her back to Highland, Zelda turned before stepping inside. "Mama," she said, "don't worry. I'm not afraid to die." She entered the asylum as into a church. The spring of 1948 found her lighter for a while, playing bridge, walking the grounds. She wrote Scotty, "The jasmine blooms, the crocus dots the lawns. I long to see the garden and watch the fires die down." Then came March 10th. Just after midnight, fire broke in the diet kitchen. Flames shot up the dumbwaiter shaft, spilling smoke through the stone corridors. There was no alarm, no sprinklers. The fire escapes were wooden. Doors were locked, windows chained. The women trapped on the top floor pressed at the glass, calling into smoke. 9 died there, 6 in the attic ward, Zelda among them. Her body was found by a single charred slipper. She was buried beside Scott in Rockville, Maryland, on St. Patrick's Day, 1948. A bright, tender day, so unlike the cold one that had buried him. Friends gathered quietly. The air smelled of thawing earth and cut grass. Someone placed spring flowers on the mound. Another laid 2 wreaths of pansies, one for each of them. At last, the Fitzgeralds were side by side. The fire that began in brilliance ending, as all bright things do, in silence. Zelda Sayre Fitzgerald lived in a century too narrow for her brilliance. She danced on rooftops, wrote thunder into letters, and lit the room before anyone knew there was fire. They called her Muse, Madwoman, Myth, but she was always more. The voice they borrowed, the flame they feared, the sentence they stole. And even now, long after the jazz has faded, her shadow still lingers, wild, unbroken, unforgettable. Thank you for watching this week's video on Zelda Sayre Fitzgerald. Do you think Zelda Fitzgerald was ever truly understood in her own time or even now? Was she a victim of her era or of her own brilliance? Can madness and creativity ever be separated, or were they, for Zelda, one and the same? And if she had been born 50 years later, would she have been celebrated or silenced in a different way? Here at Mythic Women, we go beyond the scandal to tell the whole story of the forgotten, the miswritten, and the misunderstood. We bring you the glory and the fall, the broken and the unbreakable, the women who shattered expectations, the world around them, and sometimes themselves. Thank you for being part of this journey, for helping us keep these stories alive. Every view, every like, every share is an act of remembrance, a small rebellion against erasure. Let me know your thoughts on the channel and who you'd like to see next. Thank you to our members and patrons, the mythic men and women who make all of this possible. Velocity Girl, ZenLife68, Philip Gallegos, Kingsley Clark, Kafam Chung, Deborah Himes, Bavia, Tracy Walsh, Joy McGuire, Amanda Lynn, Deborah Shepard, Jules Mack, Kimberly Ray, Monica, Krista Schaefer-Hazlitt, Deborah Chmielewski, Anna Livy, Kathleen Martin, Kelly Bowen, Melissa Gilmore, Marsha Corbin, Randy Fox, Deb Fisher, Indira Betcha, Nikayla Rayana, Sarah Bleiberg-Stanton, and Snowball. Additional thanks to Joanne Thomas Yacato, Janet Phelps, Black Cat Tarot, Chrissy Bethune, Karen Craig, Murphy's Bed, Lynn Sharp, M. King, Virgie R. Nelson, Michelle Inman, Dean Augustine, Wendy Fairfull, Trudy DeSwart, Susie Work, Ram, Fiona McDougall, Julianne Scoverin, Sashi, Amy Johnson, Patricia Ahmad, and Kathy Harris. Morgan Rose, Moore Ross, Mary Margaret Cronin, The Moon is Blue Tonight, Julia Sierra Sanchez, MPB Angola, Deborah Eaton Kent, Rebecca Christians, Melu Marsa, Catherine Wolfe, Virginia Fraser, Cindy Morton, Elle Stadler, Libby Armstrong, Albert Norman LeBeouf, Julie Woith, Abby Henriksen, Susan Gillen, Hello Kitty, JK, Charles Rosenbaum, Joanne Coleman, Maria Swisher, Michelle Gross, Trisha Commons, Lori Weckbaugh, Miriam Danielle, Sally, Tillery Sims, Cynthia Nagley, Judy Triplett, Shauna Nelson, Jody Bertolucci, Devin Hughes, Tiffany Bristow, Caribbean, Leanne, Jody Mamenga, Tracy Wilson, Ashley Kane, Sarah Herbert, Donay Crossley, Natcher Grell, Colleen Fay, Ann Casillas, Cynthia Mace, and Mina. Newest members, Nika Loving, Jenny Foster, Claire Zimmerman, Gianna Bloomer, Nicole Ramsey, Jennifer Phillips, Julianne D., Peter Kaukonen, Jacqueline Spalding, Crystal Wilhite, Virginia Martinez, TJ Sia, Zigzag, Michelle Owen, Marcelina Martin, Beth Dawson, AP, Amber Perry, Shanna Supreme, P. Gallegos, Deborah Britton Offer, Catherine Rotensky Harrison, Vicky Russell, Coralie Reed, Lindsay Zeller, A. Terhar, Jean, Tanya Maza, Anne-Marie Walker, Generic 99, Nida S., Judith Barnett, Andrea Blackburn, Cheryl Kincaid, Laura Frankstone, Rebecca Salmon, Kathleen Veronese, Black Knight 5897, Mary Jane Moore, Three French Hens, Paula Coons, Suzanne Senaden, Mark Fowler, Paul Fleischer, Patricia Colwell, and Liz Briskin. If I missed your name, leave a comment below and I'll make sure to put you at the top next week. And congratulations to this week's trivia winner, July Z3. Many of you got the Hemingway question right, but she was first. We'll keep doing these every Wednesday, so keep an eye out. And finally, thank you again for every watch, comment, like, and share. To the silent men and women who simply stay until the last note fades, thank you too. Until next week, stay curious, stay strong, keep exploring history, and as always, thank you for watching Mythic Women.